My in-laws poisoned our dog because they thought it was a threat to our daughter. Me, 28F, and my husband Mark, 30M, have been together for 5 years, married for 2. We have a beautiful 2-year-old daughter, Emma. Mark's family has always been a bit eccentric, but we've tried to maintain a good relationship with them for the sake of our daughter. Mark's mother, Karen, 55F, is a retired real estate agent who has always been a bit of a control freak. She's never really approved of me, thinking I'm not good enough for her precious son. His father, Robert, 60M, is a retired banker who mostly just goes along with whatever Karen says to keep the peace. Despite their flaws, we've made an effort to include them in our lives and have them over for holidays and occasional weekend visits. That is, until the incident with our beloved dog, Buddy. Buddy was a 5-year-old golden retriever that we adopted from a local shelter shortly after getting married. He was the sweetest, most gentle dog you could imagine, and he absolutely adored Emma. They were inseparable, and Buddy would never let any harm come to our little girl. Karen had always been a bit judgmental about Buddy, claiming that he was poorly trained and that we weren't firm enough with him. She insisted that we should have gotten a purebred dog from a reputable breeder instead of a mutt from the pound. Despite her constant criticisms, we loved Buddy unconditionally, and he was a cherished member of our family. It all started on a sunny Saturday afternoon when Karen and Robert came over for a visit. As usual, Buddy was ecstatic to see them, wagging his tail and trying to lick their faces in excitement. Karen immediately recoiled, scolding Buddy and telling him to get away from her in a harsh tone. Emma, who was playing nearby, started crying at the sight of her beloved dog being yelled at. I tried to calm the situation, telling Karen that Buddy was just being friendly and meant no harm. But she wouldn't have it, insisting that we needed to keep him away from her and Robert during their visit. Later that evening, after Karen and Robert had left, I noticed that Buddy seemed a bit lethargic and wasn't his usual energetic self. At first, I chalked it up to him being tired from all the excitement of their visit. But then, the next morning, Buddy refused to eat his breakfast, which was extremely out of character for him. He also seemed to be having trouble keeping his balance, stumbling around the house as if he were dizzy. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I rushed Buddy to the vet, desperately hoping it was nothing serious, but the vet's diagnosis was shocking. Buddy had been poisoned, likely with some sort of toxic substance. The vet asked if Buddy could have gotten into any household cleaners or chemicals, but I knew for a fact that we kept all those things safely locked away, out of reach of both Buddy and Emma. That's when the horrible realization hit me. The only people who had been around Buddy recently were Karen and Robert. I immediately called Mark at work, frantic and in tears, and told him what had happened. He was just as horrified as I was, unable to believe that his own parents could be capable of such a cruel act. But the evidence was damning. Buddy had been perfectly fine until their visit, and then he suddenly fell ill with symptoms of poisoning. Mark promised to confront his parents as soon as he got home, while I stayed at the vet's office with Buddy, praying that he would pull through. When Mark arrived home, he wasted no time in calling his parents and demanding an explanation. At first, they feigned ignorance, claiming they had no idea what could have happened to Buddy. But Mark wasn't buying it. He laid out the timeline. Buddy was fine until their visit, and then suddenly became deathly ill with symptoms of poisoning. He accused them outright of poisoning our beloved pet, and the line went silent. After a long, tense pause, Karen finally spoke up, her voice dripping with disdain. That mangy mutt was a danger to our granddaughter, she spat. We were just trying to protect her. Mark was floored. How could his own mother justify such a heinous act? He tried to reason with her, explaining that Buddy had never been anything but gentle and loving, especially with Emma. But Karen was adamant. That beast could have turned on her at any moment, she insisted. We did what we had to do to keep our family safe. Mark was livid. He couldn't believe the twisted logic his mother was using to justify her actions. Buddy was a member of our family, and they had tried to kill him out of some misguided sense of protection. He told them in no uncertain terms that they were never to come near our home or our daughter again until they took responsibility for what they had done and apologized sincerely. Karen scoffed, accusing Mark of being ungrateful and disrespectful. Robert, as usual, remained silent, unwilling to go against his wife's wishes. For the next few days, tensions were high. Buddy was still in critical condition at the vet's office, and we were racking up expensive medical bills trying to save his life. Karen and Robert, meanwhile, were acting as if nothing had happened. They kept trying to call and visit, insisting that we were overreacting and that they had done nothing wrong. Mark refused to speak to them, and I was too heartbroken and angry to even consider letting them back into our lives until they took accountability for their actions. Then, one day, we received a horrifying call from the vet. Buddy's condition had taken a turn for the worse, and they didn't think he was going to make it. We rushed to the vet's office, tears streaming down our faces, to say our final goodbyes to our beloved pet. Buddy was barely conscious, but he managed to give a weak wag of his tail when he saw us, as if to say he was grateful for the life we had given him. It was one of the most heartbreaking moments of our lives, and we knew that Karen and Robert's actions had robbed us of countless more years with our furry family member. After Buddy's passing, Mark was consumed by grief and anger. He wanted to make sure that Karen and Robert faced legal consequences for their actions, so he contacted a lawyer to explore our options. The lawyer explained that, depending on the specific toxin used, they could potentially be charged with animal cruelty, a felony offense in our state. With the vet's medical records and our eyewitness accounts of Buddy's sudden illness following their visit, we had a solid case against them. Armed with the lawyer's advice, Mark made one final attempt to reason with his parents. He laid out the legal consequences they were facing and gave them a chance to come clean and apologize. But Karen remained defiant, insisting that they had done nothing wrong and that we were overreacting. Robert, as always, said nothing in their defense, content to let his wife call the shots. With no other choice, Mark filed a formal complaint with the police, and Karen and Robert were charged with felony animal cruelty. The legal battle took a heavy emotional toll on our family. Emma, who was too young to fully understand what had happened, kept asking when Buddy was coming home. Every time we had to explain that Buddy was gone, her little face would crumple in sadness, and it broke our hearts all over again. Mark was racked with guilt, feeling partially responsible for exposing Emma to the toxicity of his parents' actions. He also struggled with the betrayal of having his own flesh and blood do something so cruel and unforgivable. As for me, I was consumed by anger and bitterness towards Karen and Robert, unable to fathom how anyone could be so heartless towards a defenseless animal, let alone their own family. In the end, Karen and Robert were found guilty of animal cruelty and sentenced to probation and fines. It wasn't the harsh punishment we had hoped for, but at least there were consequences for their despicable actions. As for our family, we've cut off all contact with them. The emotional scars from what they did run too deep, and we can't bring ourselves to expose Emma to their toxic influence. Buddy's memory lives on in our hearts, and we've vowed to one day adopt another rescue dog in his honor. But we'll never forget the senseless tragedy that robbed us of years with our beloved pet, all because of Karen and Robert's twisted sense of protection. If there's one lesson to be learned from this nightmare, it's that sometimes, the greatest danger to a family comes from within. Break Story 2. I, 32F, come from a somewhat dysfunctional family, but I thought things were getting better after I moved out and started my own life. My parents, Mom, 58F, and Dad, 60M, have always had issues with codependency, enabling, and a lack of boundaries. Despite this, I maintained a relatively stable relationship with them over the years. My younger sister, Emily, 28F, on the other hand, has been the family's problem child. She's struggled with substance abuse, impulsive behavior, and an overall inability to take responsibility for her actions. Our parents have bailed her out of countless situations, financially and otherwise, much to my frustration. About a year ago, Emily hit rock bottom again and agreed to go to rehab. It was a costly program, but our parents were willing to pay for it, desperate to see her get her life back on track. After completing the program, Emily claimed she was a changed woman and wanted to make amends with the family. I was skeptical, but Mom and Dad were overjoyed. They offered to let Emily stay with them temporarily while she got back on her feet. Against my better judgment, I decided to give her another chance and tried to be supportive. For a few months, things seemed to be going well. Emily was attending AA meetings, had a part-time job, and appeared to be genuinely trying to turn her life around. I started to let my guard down, hoping that this time, the changes would stick. One day, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off some documents Dad had asked for. As I walked into the living room, I noticed Emily's purse on the coffee table, and something didn't seem right about it. Out of curiosity, I opened the bag, and my heart sank. Inside, I found a stash of jewelry, watches, and other valuables that clearly didn't belong to Emily. I immediately recognized some of the pieces as family heirlooms that had been passed down for generations. As I dug deeper into the purse, I found more stolen items, electronics, cash, and even a few of Mom's prescription bottles. It became painfully clear that Emily had been systematically stealing from our parents, taking advantage of their trust and generosity once again. I felt a mix of anger, disappointment, and heartbreak. How could she betray us like this after everything our family had done for her? I knew I had to confront her, but I also needed to gather evidence and figure out how to break the news to our parents without causing them further pain. I decided to wait until Emily returned home from her job that evening. When she walked through the door, I was sitting on the couch, her purse open in front of me, the stolen items laid out for her to see. Emily's face turned pale as she realized she'd been caught red-handed. At first, she tried to deny it, making up flimsy excuses about how the items must have ended up in her bag by mistake. But as I presented more and more evidence, her lies crumbled. Finally, Emily broke down in tears, admitting that she had been stealing from our parents for months. She claimed it started small, taking a few dollars here and there to support her drug habit, but it quickly spiraled out of control. I was livid. How could she throw away the incredible opportunity our parents had given her, not to mention the trust of the entire family? I demanded that she come clean to Mom and Dad immediately, but she begged me not to tell them, promising to stop and make things right. Of course, I didn't believe her empty promises. I knew that if I didn't intervene, the stealing would only continue, and our parents would be left devastated and financially drained once again. I gave Emily an ultimatum: either she would tell Mom and Dad the truth that very night, or I would do it for her. Reluctantly, she agreed, knowing she had no other choice. When our parents came home from running errands, we gathered in the living room. Emily, still in tears, confessed everything. The looks of shock, disappointment, and betrayal on Mom and Dad's faces will forever be etched in my memory. Mom collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably, while Dad paced the room, his face red with anger. They couldn't believe that after all the sacrifices they'd made for Emily, she had repaid them by stealing from them in such a despicable way. Emily tried to apologize, but her words fell on deaf ears. Dad demanded that she leave the house immediately, refusing to enable her behavior any longer. Mom, torn between her love for her daughter and the hurt she felt, could barely look at Emily. As Emily gathered her things to leave, the situation took an even more dramatic turn. Dad had called the police, determined to press charges against his own daughter for theft. When the officers arrived, they found the stolen items laid out as evidence. Emily was read her rights and placed under arrest, her pleas for mercy ignored. I could see the pain in our parents' eyes as they watched their daughter being handcuffed and led away, but they knew they couldn't let her actions go unpunished this time. In the weeks that followed, the family was torn apart. Mom and Dad were devastated, not only by Emily's betrayal but also by the harsh reality of having to press charges against their own child. Emily, meanwhile, was facing serious legal consequences. She was charged with multiple counts of theft and could be facing jail time. Her lawyer tried to argue that her actions were fueled by addiction and mental health issues, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. As for me, I was caught in the middle, trying to be a mediator and support system for everyone involved. But the truth was, I felt just as betrayed and hurt as our parents did. The situation took another dramatic turn when Emily's lawyer discovered that some of the stolen items had been sold or pawned off. This escalated the charges to include fencing stolen goods, a much more serious offense. Our parents were devastated to learn that not only had Emily stolen from them, but she had also profited off their belongings in such a callous way. The emotional toll on them was immense, and I could see their health and well-being deteriorating as the legal battle dragged on. After months of court appearances and negotiations, Emily ultimately accepted a plea deal. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation and mandatory counseling and rehabilitation programs. It was a harsh sentence, but one that our parents felt was necessary for Emily to truly face the consequences of her actions and get the help she desperately needed. Still, watching their daughter being led away in handcuffs was one of the most heartbreaking moments they had ever endured. As part of the plea deal, Emily was also ordered to pay restitution to her parents for the stolen items and any associated legal fees. However, given her financial situation, it was unlikely that she would be able to pay back the full amount anytime soon. This added an extra layer of stress and burden on our parents, who were already struggling with the emotional and psychological impact of Emily's betrayal. They had to come to terms with the fact that they might never fully recover the sentimental and monetary value of the items she had stolen. In the aftermath of Emily's sentencing, our family was left to pick up the pieces and try to heal. Mom and Dad attended counseling sessions to work through their feelings of guilt, anger, and sadness, but the road to recovery was long and difficult. For me, The experience left me feeling disillusioned and wary of trusting Emily ever again. I struggled with feelings of resentment towards her for putting our parents through such a traumatic ordeal, and I worried about the long-term impact it would have on their mental and physical health. Looking back, I can't help but feel a sense of sadness and regret. Emily's actions not only shattered our family's trust but also caused immeasurable pain and heartache. While I know that her addiction and mental health issues played a role, it doesn't excuse the betrayal or the lasting consequences we all have to live with. As for our future, it remains uncertain. Emily will eventually be released from prison, and we'll have to navigate the complex process of attempting to rebuild our relationships and move forward. It won't be easy, but for the sake of our family, we have to try. If there's one lesson I've learned from this experience, it's the importance of setting boundaries and not enabling destructive behavior, no matter how much you love someone. Sometimes, tough love is the only way to break the cycle and protect yourself and those around you.